Welcome to Torah Today Ministries and our continuing series, Parshah Seasonings, where we look at some of the untranslated parts of the weekly Hebrew Torah portion that just don't get translated, at least not translated correctly, into our English Bibles. And we also look at some of the anomalies found only in the Torah scroll. And in this episode, we are in Torah portion Korach, which covers Numbers, chapters 16 through 18. And I hope I don't stumble over my words through the rest of this. But Korach is one of three Torah portions, all found in the book of Numbers, that are named after a person. Now, there is one other one back in Genesis called Chaya Sarah, which means the life of Sarah. But the title there is two words, and it does have Sarah's name in it. But these are only three that are just one word, one name, that completes the title of the Torah portion. And if we look at these three Torah portions, they are Korach, Balak, and Pinchas, all again in the book of Numbers. And we think about them, Korach was a Jew who had a wicked heart. He had a very lofty position in the nation of Israel, but he wasn't satisfied with his position. He wanted to grasp more power, more authority. And God worked a wonder. He opened the earth, swallowed up Korach and all those who were in rebellion with him, and closed the earth back up over them. That was a bizarre day. That would have been something to see. So here we have a wicked Jewish leader. And then later on we come to Balak, who was a wicked Gentile leader, a Gentile king. And he is the one who had the bright idea to hire the prophet, the wicked prophet Balaam, to come and to curse the Jewish people. And as we get into the Torah portion coming up, I'm sure you've read it already, Balaam's attempts to curse the Jewish people completely failed. So instead he counseled Balak to send in some of his most beautiful women from the Midianite people and to seduce the men into idolatry and fornication. And as a result, God brought a plague upon the Jewish people. So we have a wicked Jew, a wicked Gentile, but then with Phinehas or Pinchas, we find a very, very righteous Jewish man whose act of zeal for God was so memorable and so marked that God established with him a Brit Shalom, a covenant of peace. So as we go through Numbers, I just want to make you aware of this. You can be thinking about the differences between Korach, Balak, and Pinchas. And I think it'll enhance your studies as you compare these three. Now, if we look at Korach's name, we can rearrange the letters of Korach to spell the Hebrew word choker, which means to analyze. And this really gives us a look into the very heart of what Korach's problem really was. Instead of being a spiritual man who simply in humble devotion and awe of God just obeyed God and was grateful for what God had given him, he had to analyze everything. He lived by human reasoning. And you've heard me say many times before that the greatest enemy of faith is human reasoning. The soulish man can never grasp the things of the Spirit of God. He cannot understand what makes spiritual people click, what makes them work. But the spiritual person can discern the soulish person and understands them. But the spiritual man will always be a mystery to the soulish man. And Korach was definitely a soulish person. He lived by human reasoning and logic. And if you look at the logic and the reasoning he brings before Moses and Aaron, it's impeccable. Except for one thing. Korach simply leaves God out of the picture. What God wants doesn't really register in Korach's soul. So Korach just simply was not satisfied with his lofty position in Israel. He wanted more authority and more power. And as a result, God opened the earth and swallowed him up and all those who were in league with him in his rebellion. Now, Rabbi Schneerson has a very clever insight into the letters of Korach's name. He says that the 3 letters of Korach's name, and here you see them down the left-hand column, Kof, Resh, and Chet. He says they are all graphically similar to the letter He. And at first you may think, well, they don't look at all like the letter He, but just follow along. The letter He, the 5th letter of the alphabet, you could say it represents the 5 books of the Torah. It's God's instruction to us. But He also makes the sound of the letter H. It's just an outbreathing. It's an image, so to speak, of God's Spirit, God's breath. And this is the thing Korah lacked. He simply did not obey the authority of the Torah that God gave through Moses, and he lacked the Spirit of God in his life. But if we look at these 3 letters, Kof, Resh, and Chet, and this is what Schneerson says in my own words. He says Kof looks like the He because it has the horizontal top and the right side that comes down. But the left side goes way down too far below the line. And he says that these are like people who simply want more ostentation in their lives. It's like just being what you're supposed to be isn't good enough. We want to go deeper. We want to bend in and point attention to our depth. We want to be more ostentatious, draw more attention to ourselves. So it's like, look how deep I am, and then we point toward it. And so the Kof, though it's a perfectly good and holy letter on its own, when it tries to be a He, it doesn't do a very good job. And it's interesting that the name of the letter Kof means monkey. And what do monkeys do? They imitate. Now, Resh looks like this part of the letter He, but it's missing this part on the left. And this part of the letter He is said to represent the mind, the thoughts, the insights, the inner man, because the letter Resh means head. It's the thought life. It's the place where we really meditate upon God and His Word. But that little stroke that's missing is to represent our actions, and it's completely gone. You know, there's some people, they're full of theology, they're full of opinions, but there's a lot of talk, but not much walk. Other people are action people, and they're always ready to do something, but their actions are not informed by the wisdom of God's truth. We need to have both of these in balance. And then the Chet looks just like a He, but the He has this gap here. There's this small gap between the top and right side, and then this small bit on the left. And these are like people who lack awe of God. You know, there's always got to be this holy distance between us and God. It's like when, I know that sounds strange, but when Moses was drawn to the burning bush, he kept closer, he came closer and closer and closer. Finally, God stopped. God says, stop. You're now on holy ground. Take your shoes off. So I've let you to come this close, but this is as far as you come. Later on, when Moses wanted to see God's glory, God says, you can't see my glory, but I'll let you see all my goodness. I'll put you in the cleft of the rock, cover you with my hand. When I've passed by, I'll remove my hand, and you can see the back of me. So you can see, but there's a point past which you just can't come, at least not yet. We're to always be seeking God's face. But there's a point we can't quite cross yet until we stand before Him in our new bodies, our resurrection bodies. But there's some people who are just too familiar with God. And as a result, they don't treat God with awe. It's like God is my buddy, my pal, my amigo. And they're just a little too familiar, a little too casual. with God. So this little gap here represents this, how close we can come, but we still need to realize God is God and we are not. And we need to treat him with holy awe and respect. So when you look at these three letters and how they resemble hay, but they're not quite hay, then we get an idea of how Korach, in so many ways, could resemble a godly Jew. But he missed the mark. He just simply missed the mark. Now, if we go on further in chapter 16 and verse 38, in your English Bibles, that will be the reference. If you have a Hebrew Bible, it's going to be chapter 17, verse 3. Just one of those places where the verse numbers get a little bit out of alignment with each other. After the earth opens up and Korach and his company are all swallowed up by the earth, God tells Moses and Aaron to collect the incense censers that they had with them. And this is what it says. As for the censers of the sinners against their souls. And your translation in English probably does not have it worded that way. But what I'm trying to do is follow the Hebrew as closely as I can, because a sinner against his own soul is a Hebrew idiom for suicide. What is happening here is God's telling us that these men who wanted more authority and they rebelled against me, they committed suicide. You might say, well, wait a minute, they didn't commit suicide. God killed them by opening up the earth and swallowing them whole. And that's true. But the reason he did that is because they committed spiritual suicide by rebelling against God's ordained authority. That's a profound thought. But we're not talking here about some novice believer who's rebelled against God's authority in his life. You kind of expect that from the immature. But when you're a person who's walked with the Lord for years, and you're in a position of responsibility like Korach was and these men who are with him, when you've known God and then you rebel against God's ordained authority, that is very severe. That is a terrible trespass. And here, under the surface, God is calling it spiritual suicide. Because when you're at this level and you rebel against God, you're doing the same thing Satan did. He had a high authority with God, but he rebelled. That was spiritual suicide. And if we do the same, it's the same with us. And just as the enemy will be cast down to the earth, and we'll all look at him and say, is this the man who made the world a wilderness? This is the man who shook the world? God is going to, in spiritual terms, kind of open up the earth and swallow us up. He's going to bring us down low. So anyways, going on. As for the censers, these copper or brass censers of the sinners against their souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar. Now, why were they used for that? And this gets away from the real theme of the Parshah seasonings, but if I can just give a little rabbi trail. They made this covering to go over the altar, so when the altar traveled, it would be covered with this sheeting of brass and copper made from the fire pans of these sinners. That means that every time you look at the altar, you're going to think of Korah and his company and what they did. And what is it they did? They wanted to be on an equal status with Aaron and Aaron's sons, the priests. They wanted to be priests. They wanted to serve at the altar. So their rebellion, which caused their deaths, from that, God takes these censers and he has them made into a covering for the altar to be a reminder to everyone who sees it. This is the barrier. I can only do what God has commissioned me to do, and I dare not overstep the authority he has given me. And that covering of the altar reminds me that only the priest, only the sons of Aaron are the ones who serve at that altar, not me. All right, let's pick it up and go on. For they offered them before Adonai, and they became holy. Thus they shall be a sign to the people of Israel. Now I want to take this phrase, the sinners. And in Hebrew, it's the word ha-chataim. Ha-chataim, the sinners. That word is found only twice in the Bible. Here, referring to the followers of Korach. And the other place is in 1 Samuel 15:18. And Adonai sent you on a mission and said, go, devote destruction to ha-chataim, the sinners. Who are the sinners? The Amalekites. And fight against them until they are consumed. Of all the peoples in the Canaanite peoples and the peoples that Israel encountered in the wilderness, the worst, the most wicked, the ones that God commissioned Moses and Joshua to have a war against forever and to erase their name from under heaven, it was Amalek. When you read the book of Esther, the wicked oh my goodness, not Mordecai, but Haman, the wicked Haman was a descendant of Amalek. I mean, this gives you a sample of how wicked these people were. God wanted them wiped out. The word Amalek means people of licking up. These are people who are just wicked, and they consume the same food as Satan, who goes on his belly, he eats the dust of the earth. Amalek, the people of licking up. They have a satanic appetite. And God uses this phrase, hakataim, the sinners, for two groups of people. The Amalekites and Korah and his followers. These men who had a lofty position in Israel. This should be a dire warning to us when we get, as my dad would say, a little too big for our britches. When we're not satisfied with what God's given and we want more. And we try to take on more authority to the point we rebel against the authority God has established. We need to be very careful because we've developed an appetite not much different from Amalek. And we're behaving like the devil who wanted more authority than what God had given him. And he became Hasatan, the Satan. Well, going on further, this is something that I discovered early on in my study of Hebrew that is just always is a source of like one of those spiritual chuckles every time I come across it, because it just encourages my faith when I see it. It's in Numbers 6, spiritual chuckle. That's a new one. But Numbers 16:13, it says, "Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you will rule over us?" I mean, the people now are all upset because Korah and his people have died and these things are happening. They're just getting the last complaints out of their systems before finally they get to the Jordan and finally get to go across. But this phrase, "you will rule," is one word in Hebrew. It's tistarer. And of all the words that are used in the Torah, and possibly in the Tanakh, but in the Torah at least, this word has a greater numeric value than any other word. It has a numerical value of 1,500. There is no word in the Torah, possibly in the Tanakh, that has a greater numeric value than this. You might be wondering, how do these 5 letters have such a high value? Well, Tav has numerical value of 400, and there's another Tav there. Shin has numerical value of 300, and then Resh, there's 2 of these, each have a numerical value of 200. So Tistarer is made up of the last 3 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Rosh, Shin, and Tav. And together, 1,500. Well, when I came across this, it made me think, well, what has the lowest numerical value of any word in the Bible? And that word is the word Av, Father. It has a numerical value of only 3. It's 2 letters, Aleph and Beit, the first 2 letters of the alphabet. Aleph is 1 and Beit is 2, and together they add up to 3. So when you think about this, you take the smallest word, Av, and the biggest word, tistarer, 3 and 1,500, and you put them together, what does it say? Av tisterer, Father, you shall rule. The smallest and the greatest. All the other words come in between, because this is the master theme of everything God wants to tell us through the scriptures. Father, you shall rule. And there's a great deal implied in that. If we're calling him Father, that means we're his children. And if he's going to rule, that means we're going to be okay, because he's going to rule and he's our Father. How can we lose? If we can just lay hold of the message found in these two words, then we know what the whole Bible is really about. Oh, going on a bit further. In Numbers 16, verse 32, it says, "And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households and all the people who were with Korah and all their goods." Just a little note here. Korah's own sons did not align themselves with Korah. They stood apart from him. These were golly, gutsy young men, and they survived. And the reference you can look up, which states that, is in Numbers chapter 26, verses 10 and 11, which says, "And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, together with Korah, when that company died, when the fire devoured 250 men, and they became a warning. But the sons of Korah did not die." Sons of Korah did not die. And when you go to the book of Psalms, you'll find 11 psalms in the book of Psalms written by the sons of Korah. And if you print out the notes, down in the references, I give you the numbers of those psalms. You can read them. And one of them even talks about how they have faith in God even when the earth shakes and cracks up. So they had some personal family experience, family history with that, didn't they? So this phrase, the people who were with Korach, is Ha'adam Asher LeKorach, 3 words. And if you look at the last letters, Mem, Resh, and Ket, those 3 letters together spell the word cherem, which means condemned. When you align yourselves with a rebel, even if that rebel has a lot of theology and Bible knowledge, even if they have a high position in the redeemed community, even if they seem like they themselves are like Moses and Aaron, if they are not aligning in humble obedience to their God, then they are condemned. This seems to describe every wolf I've ever met who dresses themselves in sheep's clothing. And then finally we come to chapter 17, verse 8. It's going to be verse 23 in the Hebrew Bible. It says, "On the next day, Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds." The context of the story, of course, is this. The people are kind of wondering, how do we know that the tribe of Levi is indeed the priestly tribe? So Moses invites each of the tribal leaders to bring their staff to him, and they put their names on them, and then he takes the staffs, takes them into the tabernacle, leaves them overnight. In the morning, he takes all the staffs out, and the staffs of the other tribal leaders were unchanged, but Levi's staff, Aaron's staff, had produced branches and almond leaves and fresh almonds. So this dead piece of wood was actually alive in some way. Now the word for almonds is the word shechedim. Shechedim. There you can see it. And those 5 letters can be rearranged to spell kedoshim, which means holy ones. Now, let me just pause here for a second. If you've been following these Parshah seasons, you know we do a lot of things like this, because this is what the rabbis do. They take words, they shuffle the letters to see what other words emerge, and I've shared those. And you would be thinking, well, that's just weird. You could do that with English words and so on. But this is the holy language. And just to prove to you this is not something I'm making up, that the rabbis make up, I want to show you something that proves that even God plays this game. So just hold on for a moment. So anyways, the letters for the word almonds, shekedim, can be rearranged to spell kedoshim, which means the holy ones. Now, shekedim is the plural, almonds with an S, but the singular is just shakad or shakade. There you can see it. That's the word for almond. And if we go over to Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, and this only really makes sense in the Hebrew. It says, "And the word of Adonai came to me, saying, Jeremiah, what do you see? And I said, I see a shakade, an almond branch. Then Adonai said to me, you have seen well, for I am shokade, I am watching over my word to perform it." You see, the word for almond, shakade, and the word for watching over, shokade, are spelled exactly the same in Hebrew. They are the same three letters, shin, kof, dalet. But God is playing this game. He asked Jeremiah, what do you see? I see an almond branch. It doesn't take any genius to say, oh, that's an almond branch. It's got almonds on it. But God compliments him, says, you've seen well. And then he throws him a curve. He says, because I am shokade, my word to perform it. I'm watching my word to perform it. God is playing this game and saying, that almond branch you see doesn't have anything to do with almonds. It's a picture that I'm watching. And you see, an almond is shaped like a human eye. Sometimes in literary descriptions of a beautiful woman, they'll say she had almond eyes or almond-shaped eyes. And in the menorah that God had Bezalel make for the tabernacle, it describes it had almond clusters and had these blossoms and bulbs and so on, but it refers to the almonds because it's like the menorah producing light is looking across the tabernacle at the table of showbread, which in Hebrew, this showbread is called the lechem panim. The lechem panim is the bread of faces. It's like they're looking across at one another. Yeah, it's quite a picture. So this play on Hebrew words, this playfulness that we find in the Hebrew, is something God's ordained. We find it many places in the Hebrew. And so just take with a grain of salt as I go through and show some of these things to you to realize this is not stuff we're just making up, but there's a playfulness in the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, almost as if they're children's blocks with the letters on them. I remember when I was a kid, I had wooden blocks and they had the letters of the alphabet on them. It's like God saying, play with them. And as I give you my word, play with the words. Because no matter how you look into it, you're going to see new things and new meanings. So no wonder David said, Adonai, unveil my eyes, that I may behold wonders from your Torah. So I hope you've enjoyed some of these small wonders that are hidden in the precious Hebrew language. So till next time, I wish you shalom and may God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.